We're talking with Coach Mike Caravana from Denison. And Mike, I have a first question I have to you is an interesting one. Outside your house, there's a fence someplace. And apparently everybody we've had on the program and anybody that's come through your program is at one point or another had to paint your fence. And part of the analogy to painting your fence was to give guys that if they're volunteers, your fence has been painted by more lacrosse coaches than probably any fence in America. And it kind of says a lot about you as a coach. And I want to start with, how many coats of paint are on your fence from assistant coaches who needed money to pay their rent to start this whole program?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know, probably 7 or 8 coats of paint are on the fence. I'm not so sure many, all my assistant coaches have done all of it, but periodically they've kind of even seen me out there and they may have picked up a brush while we were chatting about things, or they did it themselves to earn some extra money. But, when a long time story, Kevin Corrigan, the coach at Notre Dame, and I were both at Virginia together and there for summer school. And Kevin was trying to make some extra money, and he encouraged me to join him in a painting project where he was going to be the estimator of a house that needed to be painted. Kevin grew up in Charlottesville, so he had more personal connections than I did at that time. So we had gotten 2 homes that summer to paint. And the key to painting and making money is the estimation of how long it's going to take you. Kevin drastically underestimated how long it was going to take us to paint the first house, and I think we lost money on that one. So I was a true friend and kept my friendship going for the second house, where we ended up making a fair amount of money. So we both did okay after the second house. So painting and lacrosse, I think for up and coming people and just kind of making your way through it, for many of us, even the young assistants today, it's not really a very high paying position. It's not like being an assistant in football or basketball. So you got to kind of earn your extra money where you can. And in some cases back then, we didn't have as many camps or clinic or showcases to go to where you can earn some money. So you did some manual labor.
I think the stories were told as lore to how much they appreciated what you meant to them in your charitable aspect of the folks that have run through a lot of your guys. Most of the guys you picked up that have come through Denison, was a lot of it through camps, just guys you met through the camp process that were looking for a step up?
In general, we've had the longest running continual lacrosse camp, I think maybe in the country right now, with the Lacrosse Academy camp, certainly almost 30 years here in Ohio, certainly the longest one in the Midwest through the years. So we've had, many people come through and work it. And certainly, you get a chance to know guys a little bit more personally. Then you get to see them on the field, so you get to watch them in action when it comes to their professional endeavors and interests. But also, you get to realize, are these people that you can get along with or not? Most people in lacrosse are pretty good people. I think it's pretty hard not to get along with various people. I mean, we were just talking before about, if your interview with Coach Tierney, well, no one's had more success professionally than Bill Tierney. But if you met Bill at a coffee shop, and it didn't matter if you were an 8th grade kid and you were introduced to him, or you or I, he would be glad to talk with you for as long as you wish. He's a very humble guy, and I think most of us in lacrosse are very appreciative of what the game has done for us through the years. And we look forward to the opportunity to mingling with all that are involved in the game.
Are the assistants that are looking for an avenue up or a vehicle up the ladder career-wise, are they still using camp the way they might have? Where, guys are talking on the show where, they literally, started that 2nd or 3rd week of June, get in the car and go from camp to camp to camp. Is that still, or did it change a little bit?
No, I definitely think it's changed some. I mean, it is an opportunity where we've always said to some of my assistant coaches, if you're interested in working at various programs, that it could be of interest to you to work either their prospect days where they, have some times for you to be able to actually show them how you do things and get exposure to you, or to some of their actual camps, just so, again, you can build a personal relationship with them, which will solidify your opportunity for an interview in many cases if a position opened up. So I think it's still advantageous to get to know people in any profession. Any one-on-one contact that you have can be, if you like to think, could be a positive for you. And so whenever you can be engaged in that, it's important. I'd even told my assistants, even at these showcases and clinics in the summer, go sit next to Coach Tierney, go sit next to, various coaches, Coach Corrigan, and talk with them a little bit, introduce yourself. And, you can always ask them a question in between games about what they do on a man down defense. What do they do on extra man? I mean, everybody's kind of looking forward to sharing some things. And, I say the same thing. I've got 3 sons, is that, expressing interest in something and a passion for it is never a negative. You might seem awkward when you first do it, but it's never a negative to people who respect that opportunity to be able to be engaged that way. So
That's absolutely the truth. I was a sports writer for years, and I wanted to meet a hero, and that time was Joe Falls from the Detroit Free Press. So you're 15 or 16 years old, you walk up in the press box, you stick your hand out, and all of a sudden there's a conversation. So folks usually, and it seems like the more successful guys are even nicer than the guys that haven't quite obtained as much success. I think that's just a tenet that we've all worked on.
yes, I mean, it's one of those kind of things where, to me, like I tell people all the time, if anyone ever wanted to learn about coaching and they wanted to call me up and spend a day with us, or half a day with us, or an hour with us, it would always leave a very positive impression.
Welcome back to another edition of the Michigan Lacrosse Review. My name is Greg Norman, your host. We are talking with Denison legend Mike Carnival. We appreciate Mike coming aboard, and I'm going to start. Easiest part is always kind of go back to the beginning. You were probably one of the best scorers in college history at Virginia, but let's start all the way back to Long Island. And I think we've made a kind of a running joke about Long Island attackmen being a little bit different than the rest of the attackmen that are developed in the other parts of the country. But as you mentioned in a pre-interview, you're fortunate enough to play for 2 high school Hall of Fame coaches. So talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I mean, I grew up in a working class area of New York, in Franklin Square, which is one town south of Garden City. My dad worked for an insurance company as a laborer. My mom was a homemaker. I'm the baby of 4 children. I had an older brother that went to University of Maryland and was the National Junior College Player of the Year. My brother-in-law was an All-American player in Long Island at Sewanaka High School, where I went to high school. And so playing at Sewanaka was just kind of a real privilege to play, and there was a tradition of excellence there. And I played with great players both at high school. At an early age, I had great tutoring and great opportunity to learn from some top people, both as coaches and even former players. I mean, in the summers, we were coached at Sewanaka High School by All-American players that were playing in college. And so all the subtleties of the higher level game were introduced to us in 10th, 11th grade. I remember my first phone call at the payphone back in college, calling my dad on a Sunday, which was a rather, traditional thing to do. You would call home on the weekends, many of us back at that time, and you had a payphone. We didn't have cell phones. And I remember my dad said, well, how's lacrosse going? And I said, well, Dad, it's unbelievable here at Virginia. I said, this is the first time I played lacrosse without getting yelled at for like 2 straight days in a row. He goes, what do you mean? He goes, well, in high school, we were always on our pins and needles about every throw, every catch, every scoop, every hustle play that had to be done consistently. I said, here, it's kind of like, if you don't do it, okay. It doesn't mean that they're not recognizing it. It might put you on the second or third team compared to the first team, but you really weren't kind of held super accountable for it. So I give the analogy that I was fortunate to be in AP lacrosse in high school. When I went to college, it was an easy adjustment for me when it came to the mental part of the game. And I think, what I have found, having coached many All-American players, both at Brown, when I first started coaching, at Virginia, where I continued to coach after I played there, and then here at Denison a long way, it's really the mental part of the game for the freshmen. That's the hardest one to do. And it's the consistency of that over the course of your freshman year. It's a long season, and the intensity level is high, and your performance has to be at a high level. So I refer to that as like AP English. You don't have to be in AP English. You're asked to be in it, but you can be in honors English and not necessarily have the same workload or be around the same caliber of students that write as well, or teachers that might demand as much, but you choose to be in AP. And so for us, it was not a choice at Sewanaka High School. That was the way it was going to be, playing for 2 Hall of Fame coaches in Bill Rich and Tom Flatley. So we all who would get together after our freshman year and say, gosh, how easy that was, you know what I mean, for us in college, and listen to our college teammates be so flustered and so frustrating. And I've got 3 sons, and we have a very stringent, they go to Granville High School, which is one of the better public schools in the state of Ohio. And they've had a very challenging 11th grade English teacher. And yet they took AP English in 12th grade. And I often ask them after their first semester of college, well, how is your writing coming? How do you feel you write well? How do you feel that you're keeping up with your schoolwork when it comes to papers and such? And they said, Dad, our 11th grade teacher in English got us on track. I mean, this is not that hard compared to what we're used to. So I think for many of us, when we look back at those challenging, tough experiences, the ones who were fortunate are the ones who are asked for our best consistently. And that's something that we've built upon here, that I've kind of got both in high school and in college, and working with Dom and Jim Adams after as I first started coaching, and what we demand of our players here to find the success. We might not have the best team every year, but we're never going to be bad, because our level of consistency, focus, and effort is going to be at a high level, and maybe greater than other teams over time.
Did you, I would always ask the question, you pick up a lacrosse stick. Well, in Long Island, it's sort of what you do. And I think, was it the quality of coaching, as you mentioned, that was maybe the different part of the rest of the world as to why maybe Long Island has so many better players than other parts? I mean, that's certainly true of the East Coast, but.
Well, I mean, I think that's, I guess I would say back then, yes. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, possibly a high level of coaching. I think the level of coaching is improving across the Midwest in many cases, and across the South and California and the West Coast as well. The more experienced players that play, the more likely they're going to stay involved in the game. I think in Long Island, it's just something that you enjoy doing from a competitive standpoint. You grew up understanding, like, it was important to figure out who can get to the Carvel to get ice cream first. Everything is competitive in Long Island. Getting to the store first, finding the cheapest deodorant. Everything is competitive there. So I don't, again, having not lived there in 30 years, I don't know if that's still true or not. But when I speak to some of my players who are from there, it's still a little bit more so than other parts of the country. So if you're going to do something, it doesn't matter if you're going to, let's say, if a neighbor and I are both trying to create a new lawn somewhere. I want my lawn to come up first and be greener than theirs, no matter if they're my best friend or not. And so you were mentioning earlier before the interview that my college roommate was Steve Byrne, who was the National Defenseman of the Year. I was never the National Attackman of the Year. I was a 4-time All-American. Steve was not. But yet every day at practice, this is who my roommate was. This is who I competed with against every day at practice. Without Steve Byrne, I'm not a 4-time All-American attackman. You know what I mean? So, him pushing me to be the best version of myself, because I didn't want him to be better than me, was the foundation for success. And I think when you look at successful Long Island people in general in the game of lacrosse, I would think that they might come back to that foundation of competitiveness within themselves and those around them. Is just something that we were fortunate to look at and grow up with, as not necessarily being a hindrance, but something to be a crutch towards, helping us reach the full potential we might have.
A little bit of an edge, as you might say. So it's always a good thing. Coming out of high school, you go to Virginia. How did Virginia come on the map?
Virginia came on the map because Jim Adams, who was the head coach then, was very good friends with my high school coach, Tom Flatley. They had worked at Jim Adams lacrosse camp, which is one of the first lacrosse camps in the country, based in New Jersey. Jim had created it was one of the all-time greatest coaches at Army and then at University of Pennsylvania, and had went to Virginia years before. And he needed a good attackman, I guess. And Coach Flatley was like, look, I think Mike's the best attackman on Long Island. I think Mike Burnett, who was a classmate of mine and graduated in the 83 class, was arguably the best attackman in Annapolis. Jimmy Wilkerson, who was the best attackman, who was a big, athletic, strong kid from Baltimore, was the best attackman in Baltimore. So back then, there were kind of 3 main areas. Syracuse was coming on, or the greater upstate New York. was coming on, and those were the three main areas. And Tom had identified me as being someone that was good enough. The advantage I had was that I was a very good passer. I had a good opportunity. I had good vision. I had excellent skills with both my left hand and right hand, which was a little unusual. I had played in a highly driven IQ kind of offense. So looking back, Tom was like, after I talked to Coach Flatley, after I said, well, Coach, how did I get to Virginia? He's like, well, they needed someone who can come in right away and join their team together and to be kind of the kind of not necessarily playmaker, but more the quarterback of the team per se. And they needed someone right away because they had a great senior class, which we did. And my freshman year at college, we went to the national championship and lost in triple overtime to Hopkins, but we were number one ranked team in the country most of the year. So I was kind of a piece that just seemed to work out pretty well. And I think that our track record of other graduates before me at my high school had all done traditionally very well in college and had done well early again because of that AP kind of, level of focus and commitment and skills and IQ that were all just fundamentally in us that really made a big difference. And so it was just the perfect fit for us a little bit. And the other part of it was Bruce Arena, who has found great success as the U.S. national team men's coach, who this weekend just lost to in the Eastern Conference Finals with the New England Revolution, was also played lacrosse with my brother Steven at Nassau Community College and grew up in the same town that I grew up. And he came to watch me play, I think, box lacrosse back at the time, which was basically played 5-on-5, outdoor sticks, outdoor goals on a tennis court, a 3 tennis court boxed in kind of caged area with large netting around it. And I think he came to watch me play and was impressed with my skill level and IQ level to confirm what Coach Flatley was saying. So that kind of, those two guys combined said, no, this is your guy. And was the most fortunate thing that ever happened to me in many cases. My wife is from Charlottesville and went to the University of Virginia, had a great group of friends. It's a life-changing experience for me in many ways, educationally, as a person. Lacrosse-wise, it provided me with so many different growth and opportunities that I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Walk into that first year, and Kevin Corrigan, Notre Dame's coach now, was roommate Steve Byrne, and we should mention that Jerry Byrne, his brother, and Jerry would be the first to tell you that's the reason he's Jerry Byrne is because of Steve. So here's 3 guys that are, great players, 2 guys that eventually go on to be great coaches. Now, in Kevin's case, his dad, I think at the time, was the Notre Dame athletic director. Am I not mistaken?
No, he was, yes. But he had been the Virginia head athletic director previous to that.
So you're now 19, 20. Do you realize what's in the room, and do you have those long conversations as sophomores and juniors about, because you were an education major at Virginia, correct?
Yes, I was.
So you wanted to be a teacher.
I'll top that story by telling you that in the locker room, the coach's locker room, next to my locker was Gino Oriami, who was the head wonderful basketball coach at University of UConn, was the assistant women's basketball coach. Bruce Arena, who was the head men's soccer coach and assistant lacrosse coach. And then we also had Terry Holland, who was the men's basketball coach right there. And Dave Odom, who ended up being a very successful coach at Wake Forest. Those were all the guys surrounding me, 2 on each side, in the men's coaching locker room that was when I was coaching there even. So like I said to you earlier, I'm just kind of a product of a lot of different people. But one of the things that I've always prided myself on, and something my dad and mom taught me a long time ago, was, look, being a kid from Long Island, you're going to have probably a good work ethic. But the secret is being a good observer. Observe things well. Listen to people that you have respect for. Think about what they tell you and how they think about things, even if it's different than yours. But be a good observer. And I think observation is both visual, and I think what's the hardest for an Italian American to observe is to keep your mouth shut and to observe how people communicate and why they're communicating things. Because being the youngest in an Italian and in my whole family and having 17 to 18 people over every Sunday, it was 5 or 6 conversations going on. And so you never felt like you needed to wait for other people to quiet down before you commented. You just would thrust yourself in there. And when I went to Virginia, I started realizing, well, there might be a time to pause my comments. So when I'm listening to these conversations, even between, let's say, Steve Byrne and Kevin Corrigan, you know what I mean? I had a lot of respect for them as lacrosse players. And Kevin always had a good insight into the game. And so even though I might be perceived as a better player, I always thought, hey, there's always something that I can learn. And I always thought that Kevin's insight was very valuable. So what he was telling to Steve, I was listening to. I wasn't commenting on as much. When Steve was talking to Kevin, I wasn't commenting as much. And the same thing in the coaches' locker rooms. And those were just some of the, the fortunate moments that I had. I'll take credit, like I said, for being a good observer and integrating some of those wonderful conversations into my thought process on what we do at Denison, or how I thought about things as a coach and as a player. And so again, I think a lot of us would all say that, being in the right place at the right time, environment, luck are definitely crucial components of it. So
in my office at school, I have a sign that says, "I never got smarter by talking." So it's an old Mark Twain thought, but there's some.
Well, you see, no, I would have to differ with that. You might not get, you might not get smothered, but you might not eat as well on Long Island unless you make sure that you're putting your hand into the pizza to get a slice, because it'll go fast without people asking you if you want one or not. So
I get it. And whether you're Italian or whether you're some other ethnic background, I grew up in the same house in a completely different ethnic background. So it was the time when everybody lived at grandpa's and grandma's house, because that's just the way the world works.
Mm-hmm.
So
Sure.
I get that. Would you, if you didn't, was it you an education major to be a coach, or you wanted to teach, and if coaching came along, it was just what it was?
I just felt like it was probably something that I knew that I would like to do. I knew that I could be a teacher, coach. I was so impressed with my teachers and coaches, both in high school, and I felt like I can enjoy my life that way. Again, growing up around a lot of extended family. I had aunts that were paralegals who never got a college degree. I'm the only second one in my family to get a college degree. I had so many people telling me, you need to get a college degree so you can be in control of your life, that you can have more control over what you do and how you do it.
Right.
And so to me, it was, I went to school with that idea, and I could, if I can, and then my dad would say, if you can find something you like to do, you know what I mean? You won't wake up every day thinking it's work like I do. He goes, and that would be my goal for all my children, is to find something they like to do, so that as they mature and get older, that they don't look at every day as a chore to get up and to do their work. So to me, following those axioms, I was able to think about it. Yeah, like I could always be a teacher and coach. I know I might not make a lot of money, but depending upon where I choose to do that, I can find a reasonable lifestyle. I can have all my holidays off. In many cases, I could have the summer off, and if I wanted to use that for other income, I possibly could. But that kind of just all fit for me, I think. And but really going back to the idea more and more, like I really was thankful and appreciative of the high school experiences that I had, and junior high, and the coaches that made a difference for me. And if I can still do that and coach lacrosse and possibly coach soccer or football or basketball, anything else, how fun would that be? You know what I mean? So that's my thought.
So from Virginia, you had 2 years at Brown, then you have 6 years at Virginia as an associate head coach under Jim. What was the ACE, Adam? What did ACE stand for?
Well, I'm not sure everybody knows this, but everybody used to call him Ace. Jim never lost a game in high school or college, ever. He played at St. Paul's School in Maryland, and he never lost a game in high school, and he never lost a game in college. So after like his second year, I think at Hopkins, they just called him Ace, because he ace of a hand. So it kind of stuck with him a little bit, and that's the way it was. So he was a great mentor to me. Again, very different backgrounds, and yet he really took me under his wing, both as a player and as a young coach, and really kind of guided me on how to deal with people properly. You know what I mean? And how to do things right all the time as a person first and foremost. And I was very lucky to have him in that time in my life.
And the second part of that 6-year stint, I'm assuming you start thinking about maybe your own program and moving on and being a head coach at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody does if they have those kind of aspirations. I just kind of felt like it was time for me to run my own program, and felt like I needed to do that. And I think Jim felt the same way. But he gave me a very important piece of advice, which has always stuck with me, and I share with my assistant coaches as they move on, which was, I mean, he pulled me aside and he didn't have to say this to me, but he said to me, 3/4 of the people that coach get divorced. He said, so, don't be taking jobs, because at the time I was married, I didn't have any children. He was like, don't be taking jobs without your wife agreeing about going. He said, you're better off taking a lesser caliber job if you think so. But if your married life is important to you, if you want to have kids and that's important to you, he says, well, you're always going to be juggling that, but you have to kind of figure out what your priorities are and kind of keep your focus that way the best you can towards what those are. Is it your job, or is it your, is it your family, or is it your spouse? And so don't be taking jobs without conferring with your, spouse about, are we willing to do this or not? And I've always shared that with my assistant coaches. And I think it's been an important component of my marriage. And I'd like to think, some of my former coaches who are now coaching seem to be able to juggle that pretty well. It's always the piece of advice I ask them when they call me about a certain job, like, well, what does your wife think? Where is she on this thing? If we're not going in together, then, if you don't win some games and your job is miserable and your home life is miserable, that's not good. It's not going to be a very happy life. So
Take a job someplace where there is, no life, and it's just all this becomes. It takes a very special woman to be a partner with coaches, and I don't think that's untrue on even at the high school level. I think that's true, because
I definitely think so.
But
I like to think that we're better than policemen and firemen.
Yeah, well, I think if you do anything with passion, it takes, you got to understand that if you've got some passion towards it, it's that 10,000 hours of putting in to learn your craft, and I think that's part of the patience that your spouse has to have in understanding that.
Yeah, without question.
So somewhere along the line, Denison comes up on the map at a time, and I want you to reflect on this a little bit. We used to understand that Division III programs were, in some cases, and Denison would have been one of those programs that, they were almost as good as some of the D1 programs. I think that's lost a little bit because we've expanded the sport. There's a stronger D2 section in terms of playing lacrosse. So talk about how you got to Denison and was that?
Well, I was ready to be a head coach, and Denison had a tradition of excellence about it. Coach Thompson had been here for 25 years beforehand and set the program as certainly one of the elite top 15, 10 programs consistently in Division III lacrosse. At the time, like you mentioned, there was less disparity between Division I, Division II, Division III. If people really wanted a smaller school, they might opt for Roanoke College or Hobart or Denison or places like that, Washington College. And, it just depends. So to me, I was just ready to do that. Moving to the Midwest was a little bit of a different opportunity, but I felt like we could be a pretty good team here. And because we had the tradition, we had a really strong school. It just felt like a good fit, and I wanted to do it. I was actually the head soccer coach and the head men's lacrosse coach when I first took the job for 10 years combined. And I felt like, coaching soccer would also enhance my opportunity to coach lacrosse, because the more coaching opportunities I had, the better I would get it, be able to work with different people, different players, different goals, different aspirations, able to move them forward. Bill Tierney had a very similar experience at Hopkins and at RIT before he left Hopkins to go to Princeton. So we've often chatted about our soccer experiences and learning again, the opportunity. I think both of us were like, well, we're teachers, so we can learn this sport and we can learn. And by learning the sport, it'll help us. About 5 years ago, I was asked to be the head women's field hockey coach here because our coach had been on a maternity leave. And I really look forward to that experience. I have 3 sons. I never coached women before, but I spent the summer not only learning about field hockey, but learning how to, the difference in communicating between young men and young women.
Right.
And, how you do that, how do you motivate that? And, the differences between the team dynamics. was very invigorating to me at the time. You know what I mean? This is something different to keep gaining from. So I was very happy to be able to have those different experiences, you know, to help me. But I just felt I needed to be the head coach, going back to Denison's part of it. And I felt it was an important step for me, and I wanted to do it. And it just seemed like a right fit. And going back to what I just mentioned before, you know, Jim Adams always said, you know, don't take a job that you got to leave right away in 2 or 3 years. Take a job that if you end up staying there, you can stay there. And so after I interviewed for the job, I came home and I called my dad about it. And it was the last year of his life, actually. And he said to me, well, tell me about the job, which I did. And he said, well, tell me about the other coaches you met. And I said, well, this John was this and Joe was this. He said, well, how long were those coaches there? I said, well, the football coach had been here 35 years. The basketball coach had been here 25 years. The athletic director had been there 30 years. Coach Thompson, I was replaced, had been there 25 years. And my dad paused on the phone and said, well, you know, it sounds like this could be a good place for you to stay. You know, people don't stay in places unless it's a nice place to be. So with that in mind, I ended up taking the job with the idea that, hey, if I end up staying here, this would be fine. And that's the way it's ended up in many cases. So.
You seem like a very, and I know this from other people who've worked for you, you're a very thoughtful guy. Does that come from Dad?
I'd like to think so. I think it comes from being the youngest of 4 children, 7 years removed from the nearest one, who spent a lot of time with their parents alone and a lot of time at the kitchen table listening to various discussions that my parents had with my older siblings. Bruce Arena, who I mentioned before to you, I asked Bruce about 20 years ago, and I said, Bruce, what is the first thing that you do when you kind of, you know, think about a freshman coming into your program, or how do you introduce a new professional to your team? At the time, he was coaching professional soccer. He says, well, the first thing I do is I figure out where they are in the birth order of their family. He says, it's a class that I took at Cornell that really gives me a baseline. It doesn't mean it's always true, but it gives me a baseline of what their personality might be like. And when you're more than 5 years removed from your nearest sibling, you're actually an only child in the birth order book. So I was fortunate to have my parents to myself. I remember being a teenager and my brothers and sisters would come home and go, Michael has the run of this place. Like, what's going on? I'm like, look, you guys can, Mom and Dad and I are getting along perfectly fine. Our rules might be different than yours, but we're getting along fine. If this bothers you, you can stay away. You don't have to come in here. We've created our own positive environment. But I think that's where I've tried to be, you know, I think those experiences have led me to believe, to be thoughtful about recognizing each situation is a little bit different. And if we can take some time to think it through, I might be able to help myself find the best solution that I'm working towards.
When you first drove into Granville, was it an immediate kind of love? Because you spent 28 years there. Was it, you just kind of knew you were home? Or was it something that grew on you?
No, I mean, I wouldn't say that. I was open to it, I guess is what I'm saying. I was ready for the change. And what really made a difference to me was after 2 or 3 years is that my wife made a great group of friends here. And I just kind of felt like, well, you know, I could live a reasonable lifestyle. We're not too far away from Columbus. So it wasn't like in a stick somewhere. I wasn't so far away from my family that I couldn't drive if I needed to, back both in Long Island or in Charlottesville, where my wife is from. I just kind of felt like it just became home for us. Like I said, to me, you know, growing up as I did, like family is the most important thing. And I just wanted to make sure that my wife was happy, my children were happy. I'm a competitive person, so I don't want to say it didn't matter, but like we were good. You know what I mean? My 3rd year here, we were 6th in the country. We went from being unranked my first year to being 6th in the country in my 3rd year here. I needed some success professionally to stay here. I have to admit to that. Yeah. I would have left if I didn't find it, but it didn't. But I didn't have to be the number one team. But I needed to make sure that the effort and passion I put into it got a reward enough that I felt was warranted to stay with all those other extras, both family-wise and marriage-wise, that were key. And I just have felt it's home, really, like I said, for us.
A lot of offers, or any offers? You had 15 years the first time, 91 through 2005. Was there any thought of going up the ladder the last few years of that?
Yeah, I mean, there was, and there were some places that seemed to be stronger than others that I was attracted to. But it didn't, either they didn't work out because maybe I didn't interview as well as they wanted to, or my directness didn't help sometimes. I'm not afraid to say, I know you think you can be national champion, but I'm not taking this job with that, down on my back, when I think it's going to be tough for you to be a top 15 team consistently.
Right.
I do my homework. It's like me, be like two of us going into, let's just say Ford Motor Company, because we're dealing with, Michigan, and saying, well, I know you want to increase sales by 20%, but my projection is, 12% is reasonable, because I'm going to get fired in 2 years if I tell you I'm going to do this in 20%. I didn't want to do that because I was very comfortable where I was. And also some of it was like I went to the University of Pennsylvania to interview, and they told me that most of the coaches lived 60 minutes away. I walked to work here, or I could ride my bicycle if I wanted to.
Right.
That was going to be a drastic lifestyle change,
Right.
with 3 kids under 12. So like, how am I going to get to their plays, right? And how am I going to get to their games? I don't, it was, again, like, these are things that come up that I often discuss with my, assistant coaches. And it's interesting because not only did I play for Jim Adams, who made a point of that, if you look at, and if you speak to Coach Starzia, it's the same thing. He kind of didn't leave Brown to go anywhere. He left Brown to go to Virginia because, because not only were they a great school and a great team to take over, but the lifestyle that he and his wife Chrissy wanted to have, with
right.
both their, 4 children was important. And that those were my mentors. So to me, it didn't really have, it had to do with the level of competition within my division, if that makes sense, more than my division. If I went to a Division I school and couldn't be successful, it would drive me crazy. So I needed to kind of be able to compete at the highest level. That's what drove me more than being in a Division I school compared to Division III school or 2, whatever it may be. So.
Very pragmatic balance that you've talked about. So Mike, there's a lot of that balance in terms of what you look at as a person with family and athletics and a professional career in coaching. Does the balance come from home, or is it just sort of a combination of all the people you talk to?
I think it's a combination of all the people that I've spoken to. I'm fortunate. I still live a much nicer lifestyle than my parents ever had. So I'm very lucky that way. So like, I'm not missing anything
right.
of any means that I need to have or want to do. If I want to take a vacation, I can. I might not be staying at the Ritz-Carlton, but I can go to Monaco for 3 or 4 days. I might,
I get it.
And so to me, that's just the kind of way I've looked at it. I've never, like, people say to me, well, you're a 4-time American, like, you're one of the better players ever to play in college. Like, I'm not even close, to that level that some people think. I just gotta find, I think to me, I've got to find comfort in myself. But that's what I've learned. And that way I can be a better husband, a better dad, a better coach. And like I said, but I have a highly competitive streak. Don't get me wrong. I think my assistant coaches you've spoken to will tell you that. There are not always, the kindest meetings we have in the office sometimes. But but again, if I can direct that competitiveness in a positive way towards something that's possibly tangible, then it seems to work. It provides me with fulfilling a certain part of that I need to feel like I'm making a positive impact.
2005, the end of 2005, it's gone from Denison, Woodbury Forest School, and then kind of back to Denison. So kind of take us through that travel.
Well, again, I'd been here for 15 years. I had done what I thought I could do. I just wanted maybe a different opportunity, going back to Charlottesville. Woodbury Forest is about 30 miles north of Charlottesville. My wife is from Charlottesville. My brother, Steve, who was actually pretty ill at the time, was living in Leesburg, which is about an hour northwest of that, just west of DC. He had moved there with his as part of his retirement. And I did, it just was the right timing again for us at the time. And I didn't have to sell my home here in Granville. We were able to rent it, which ended up being perfect since we came back, which was fine. I just wanted to do something different. And so we moved to Woodbury. It was a great opportunity. People there were wonderful. We had a great experience. It was a nice, basically sabbatical for me to a certain degree, working with high school students and players and families. They were great. They were wonderful. But I felt the itch to come back to college. I just felt like, again, going back to that advanced component of it, was I needed a little bit more advanced. I found more comfort, and I felt like I was better suited to the college game than I was the high school game. But I was very fortunate and lucky to have that opportunity at Woodbury that they provided for me. And my wife was closer to, like I said, her family for a period of time. My brother Steve ended up passing away about a year and a half into my 2-year stay. So the year and a half that my kids had with him and I had with him and our family did was invaluable. It just seemed to work out. I've been very fortunate. I've had a lot of things happen to me that have gone, that looking back have been steps that have helped me, again, grow and be more comfortable with who I am. So
then all the way back to Denison.
Yeah, well, coming back to Denison was good. I mean, it was, like I said, it was kind of a rebirth per se. Being away from it, you come back and look at it a little differently, if you can. And, I feel like I've done my best work really the last 13 or 14 years that I've been back. I think our team's success on a national level has kind of proven that. But I think more importantly, though, I've seemed to be able to have a little bit of a better balance with my own competitiveness and my family to a certain degree, which was important because I had 3 sons and they were all going through high school when I got back the last 12 or 13 years. My youngest is a senior in college now at Ohio University, Wyatt. And so I've been very fortunate that way. And so it seems to have worked out very well. And but we've had some really, really good teams, and we've had some really, really good assistant coaches that helped us get there. And we've had some great players, but we had some wonderful players when I first came here as well. We've had some outstanding players and such, I think. But I think that's been kind of, a fun part of the last couple of years, without question.
Are you Denison? I mean, this is a kind of a loaded question, but are you a Denison for as long as you want to be there and as long as they want you, or is this kind of the last stop, or is it?
I don't think I'm looking to move anywhere per se. I mean, I don't have any interest in moving, but I also have to keep in mind that I have a little axiom that I read one time, like a little metaphor that I've used before, where, I think as you get older in coaching, you have to be more aggressive and take bolder steps towards connecting with younger people who are the people that you're coaching. So I use the analogy of walking to the back of the bus. We're on buses here for 6-7 hours, sometimes 2 hours to Worcester, or an hour to other schools. I always try to make sure that I take one walk from the front of the bus where I sit to the back of the bus, looking at what guys are reading, what they're listening to now, what movies they're watching. As you can imagine, everybody has their own personal gear now. Very different than it was 20 years ago, where you would converse. So now it's a matter of learning or taking an interest in each individual person. So, if I lose that desire, I think, to connect with the people I'm teaching, then I think I'm not going to be as good as I can be. So to me, that's always the judge. And Dean Smith, who was this very successful men's basketball coach, I remember him saying his last 5 or 7 years of his career, people would ask, well, when do you think you're going to retire, coach? And he said, well, I'm going to wait to the end of the season, he says, and I'm going to see how much energy I have, at the end of the season, to be willing to reconnect, again, another season with those players and with the people around me. If I don't have that energy, I don't have that synthesis of wanting to do it, then it's probably a good time for me to go. And in listening to some various coaches who have left somewhat early, some people would say, they're leaving early because they're leaving on top, right?
Right.
And other coaches who have left a little bit late, they're leaving late in some people's minds because they're leaving when they probably should have left a couple of years early. So it just depends. And I just kind of judge it right now. I'm at the point where I kind of judge it year to year, but I'm in no interest in leaving right now. So, but COVID has been very interesting, for many of us. It's been, on and off. Do you do it? Do you not do it? The redistribution of eligibility. The Division III young men now got another year of eligibility. So I have an outstanding freshman attackman last year. It was one of the better ones in the country, who will come back to me next year and be a freshman again, but he's really a junior academically. I mean, this is going to throw a gigantic wrench in the plans of any any kind of resemblance of normal when it comes to like how good is your team or not, who's coming back, who's not, who's coming for a fifth year or who's not. I mean, we're a liberal arts college. We don't have graduate degrees, so my players are going to graduate and go on. With Salisbury and Tufts, let's just say, two wonderful schools, two great coaches, they've got graduate degrees, so their kids can stay an extra year if they want to, or you know what I mean. It's going to be a very, very different world, no different than today. I saw that there was one of the top players at the University of North Carolina has decided to put his name in the transfer pool because he's got 3 years of eligibility left, but he's not really sure he can get into North Carolina Business School to get those years. And he wants to keep playing, but also wants to go to graduate school. So now he's almost like he's a freshman again. He's played 1 year of college lacrosse. You know what I mean? And who knows what's going to happen this year with Division I guys. He might have another year. So he's really has. So it's just, it's going to be a topsy-turvy 5 or 7 years here coming up.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to recover from this, and I don't think the new normal will look anything like what we had anticipated. I think that's something that
it's like you said. I mean,
college.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very challenging, but again, we have a pretty big roster. Let's say 52, 53 guys. I think I think we mentioned that we mentioned Coach Tierney. Coach Tierney mentioned in a recent article he's got like 65 players on his team.
Right.
Now, how's he going to manage 65 players to not only stay on the team but to play, to practice, right? Who's going to travel, who's not? That team dynamic is going to be very different. You know what I mean? It's like I said. So, when I went to Virginia, we had a roster of 36, 38 guys, which was big. Due to the growth of the game now, I think the game, all the rosters, both on the women and men's side, have really expanded at Division III level as well. And so, managing 50 is different than managing 36, as you well know. Compared to 24 is a lot easier than 36. So, those are things that are going to be, those dynamics are going to be different. No different than you're going to see a lot of kids, I think, transferring because they're not necessarily see themselves playing at a certain school, but can maybe see themselves playing at another school. They've got eligibility. Even in Division III, it might happen some. It'll certainly happen in Division I. You might even get students from Division I who say, look, I'm not going to play a lot in Division, or like on this team, but I'm really, but if I'm not going to play a lot, I might not want to stay at that school. I want to go Division III and I can play a lot more. And I like that school. You know what I mean? Right. So it depends. I mean,
I think you raised the discussion of Dean Smith. The last 15 years, Dean Smith, when North Carolina would take a basketball bus trip, he and his wife would drive. He never got on the bus because he did not want his persona to – it was the whole idea was the kids were supposed to enjoy themselves on the bus, and he didn't want to get on that bus. And it's just a different approach than you walking to the back of the bus. But my point is that I think the guys that win 5 years from now, 2 years from now, are the same guys that won 2 years ago and 5 years ago. The connection that you make is – the reason that you win, and for the most part, having better athletes helps, like anything else. But I think it'll be an interesting. I really believe the same guys that are winning now will win in the future. I don't think that changes because it's the way they do their jobs.
Well, I guess I would tend to agree. I guess I look at it differently. I would say to you that the reason why you're successful is how you respond from a loss. And I think relationships are really tested after there's disappointment. So to me, like I tell our team all the time, you really want to know how good a team you are? How do you respond from a loss? It's one of the things we've prided ourselves very greatly here at Denison. I think we've lost back-to-back games twice in my 28 years here, or something like that. So your point is reinforces it, but I'm looking at it differently, kind of going, those relationships are all tested, right. I think, greatly when after disappointment occurs. And I think that's going to propel that continued success. Without those relationships, you might not respond after the disappointment as well. And then you're going to take these turns in a negative way. And they'll continue for a period of time. And some of that is certainly talent driven and things like that, but it's those relationships that help you get back on track. So.
I try to explain to our guys that at this point, perspective is everything. We lost a high school season here in Michigan. I point out to them, I'm 66. There's a good chance in 5 years I'm going to be dead. So I have less seasons than you'll ever have at the age of 19 or 20 or 17.
Yeah. They need to know that. They need to know that. But, you hear this, the family connection that people always chant about that you hear in sports today. I tell recruits this all the time, and I say to them, I mean, I get it. But to me, and again, maybe it's growing up the way I did, but a family, it's easy to be a family when all the bathrooms work and all the cars work. It's, I mean, when you're a family member is when mom is not around because she's going to take care of your grandma's in the hospital, and now you got to share a car. Or one of the bathrooms don't work and you really need to work it out, a schedule with sisters, if you're a guy, who seem to take double the amount of time you take for some unknown reason, but they do. It's getting along when things are not easy. That's when that's when a family really comes together, when things are difficult. And so, people can say it, but to me, you live it through the challenging times. And I think and you're building relationships in a good way, in a positive way, to almost handle those difficult times with greater strength from each other.
Yeah.
And it's, and I think it's, like I said, it's, I played on some great teams. I had a team 3 years ago that it was easy to coach. They were maybe one of the best, top 2 or 3 teams I've coached here at Denison. We got to the national semifinals and lost by a goal, and certainly could have been the national champions, but it was an easy team to coach. You know what I mean? The year after we reached the national quarterfinals, it was a brutal spring to coach those guys. For whatever reason, it didn't mean they were wrong or I was wrong or the team dynamics, nothing was smooth. Let's just put it that way. You know what I mean? Yep. Injury, players getting in trouble here or there, making a poor decision. You know what I mean? Tough games. A team out of nowhere playing us. Playing phenomenal. We go into a game where we're shooting the ball at 60%. We run into a goalie who's saving to 85%. You know what I mean? Nothing was easy that season. It just, it happens. But we as a program endured that and fought through it as a program. And I think that's kind of the thing that makes important. That was clearly, if you watching, being here in Ohio, that it was, if you listen to the interim coach, Larry Johnson at Ohio State, that was the message that those guys took, knowing on Tuesday or Wednesday when they played Michigan State and Ohio State football, that we are going to win this game as a program. You know what I mean? So yes, you might be the third offensive tackle, but we recruited you here at Ohio State because you're good. Now is your time to step up for the program. You know what I mean? Right. And that's how they kind of approached it. And it didn't surprise me at all that they won that game going away, because their backs were against the wall. You know what I mean? And they have a strong culture and a good leadership. But most importantly, like I said, as a family, they ran into problems. They counted on the upper class guys to lead them the right way, and they were fortunate enough to be able to do that.
Well, being a lifelong Spartan, I can tell you that the third string tackle at Ohio State is still better than the first string tackle at Michigan State. So that's
a recruiting issue. That's different than the team culture.
Right. I'm not trying to burst your bubble, but it's
not luck. It's always easier to coach when you have better players.
I went from a public school to a Catholic school in my high school career, and in the second year of my high school career at the Catholic school, I was in the state finals, and I became a brilliant coach. No, I just had better players. Exactly. It kind of goes back to, I have a sweatshirt that I wear at my parents' meeting all the time. I said, if life is the most important thing, if lacrosse is the most important thing in your life, get a new life, because that goes back to the balance part of it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, the paradigms are fine and the culture is fine, but, I don't necessarily treat everybody the same, but I certainly treat them all equal, sort of an approach to it. Yeah. And once the kids figure out that you're fair, that it kind of takes care of itself. They may not even like you, but they know that there's going to at least be a certain integrity and respect to the process. And I think that's important.
Well, I've always, people have asked me all the time about what especially at high school level, like what's junior high, even JV. I'm like, if the players respect the coach, you're fortunate, because with that respect, there's an opportunity to learn. Yeah. Without the respect, that makes it challenging to learn.
Yeah.
So I think that's, to me, the foundation of. But again, it goes back to, okay, well, how do you get people to respect you? You've got to start working from building relationships. So.
Right now, where's Denison? This is a curiosity thing. Where's Denison? Did you play at the D1 level, at the middle down or the middle up? I'm not sure. I don't want to. I hate to compare, but I'm just kind of curious.
I guess what I say to people all the time is that we can be competitive with teams probably 30 and back in Division One. Competitive is different. I mean, what is competitive? Is competitive losing by 4 goals or 8 goals? Whatever, you know what I mean? Is it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is it 1 goal, 3 goals going into the fourth quarter and losing by 4 or 5? Very candidly, the difference in the higher level teams in Division One tends to be a couple of players. It tends to be either a great faceoff guy, a great goalie, or in our case, because we don't really, have scholarships, it's 2 or 3 Canadians who can finish, really. You know what I mean? So I mean, it's when you're talking about teams, let's say 15 and back, that's the difference. They have a couple of these players, or 3 or 4 of them. Now, when we get to play Notre Dame or Maryland or teams like that, they're going to overall, across the board be stronger than us. But
right.
The reason why they're 15 and not Maryland and Notre Dame is because they don't have as many guys as Notre Dame and Maryland has. And no different for us in Division III. The reason why we're a top 10 program is we've got more guys that are good players than teams that are 20 to 35 in general. I mean, not, but it's a very broad statement. But, we try to tell recruits, and it doesn't matter if you're a Division I recruit or Division II recruit, like go to the school you want to go to. I remember telling kids at Virginia, look, Virginia plays 3 attackmen. They don't play 4 attackmen. They don't play 5 attackmen, right? So if they're recruiting 3 attackmen a year, if I do my math, that's 12 attackmen. They don't recruit that many. I say there's 10 of them. Well, only 3 of them play. Why do you think you're going to play? I mean, why do you think you're going to play? The percentages are against you. So you better go to North Carolina or Virginia or Maryland or Notre Dame, because that's where you want to go to school first and foremost. Yeah. And then have lacrosse be the icing on the cake. Because, the only person that said anything to me about playing was my mom, talking to various college coaches that came to my house and saying, if you don't recruit my son, he's going to find a way to beat you. I'm like, Mom, you can't say that to people. Okay. You can't say that. But my mom had full confidence in me, kind of going, well, I'm just telling you, you know what I mean?
Right.
That he's going to take that approach. So, but that was me. I was very fortunate, to be able to have, like I said, a background that could possibly back that up. But again, it's, I always try to tell, go to the right school first and foremost. And this is, I hope, one of the benefits of the changing of the later recruiting date, even for the Division I guys. Right. When you're 14 or 15, what do you really know about yourself? I don't think you know nearly as much about yourself as you do at 17 or 16. I think at 16 or 17, you're going to be a high school senior. I think you have a better idea of what you're looking for in your college experience.
Yeah.
When you're 13 or 14, you're looking at Virginia, Hopkins, Notre Dame, North Carolina. Great. But is that the right school for you? Is that the right place for you? Is that the right coach for you? You know what I mean? Is that the right environment for you? And my dad said one thing to me in recruiting that always stuck with me, which is like, when you get older, you got to do what's best for you, not what's easiest for you. And that's a very hard thing to do. So, it's not what the easiest to take, maybe school A, but is it what's best for me? You know what I mean? Or is what best for you is a little bit harder? You know what I mean?
Right.
You have to judge that as an individual and figure that out. Maybe it's harder, not only academically, maybe it's harder socially, maybe it's harder lacrosse wise. You kind of want that challenge or not, but you need to take that self-assessment a little bit.
One of the threads of interviewing some of the PLL guys who are almost making a living at lacrosse. And again, they'd be multi-million-dollar athletes in a lot of other sports at the level that they've obtained in terms of their talent. They all have ancillary businesses to keep themselves afloat, whether it's a sponsorship or camps or the rest of it. And without a person, they've all said the same thing: go to school so that you have some kind of background, something to fall back on. Because we're still not in a sport that can really. You got $1 million man, and that might be Paul Rabel. But after that, you're still, guys are working 17 jobs. They're all lovely jobs, but we're not yet in a sport that can afford itself. And I think that's something that's important in making a decision where you go to school.
Yeah. One of the things that I came up with at Denison that I tried to advise our recruits about is, why don't you write a paragraph about the top 3 schools? Give me 5 different, I'm a public school kid, so let's say 5 sentences. You have to write 5 sentences about the school you want to go to. And only one of those sentences could be lacrosse. So now you're looking at it broader based. whatever school you can come up with that has 5 sentences, that could be a good school for you. If you can't find one with 5, then find one with 4. If you can't find one with 4, find one with 3, because you're going to take a more comprehensive view of it, or think a little bit, and making sure it's the right fit for you or not. And so that's just something that I've tried to simplify, you know what I mean? To be able to communicate to our recruits to make sure that hopefully Denison is the right fit for them or not, or other schools could. So.
Being fit's important. Last question, and then it's just the one I've asked almost all the other coaches. It's a little different at D3 because it's just a different question, but let me ask it anyway. IQ or physicality, and physicality basically is athleticism. If you had your choice between those two, any thoughts?
IQ or physicality? Well, I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is position.
You're the second coach that's broken it down by position, Matt Brown being the other, and he had some very specific ideas about attackmen, midfielders, and you're apparently the second smartest coach that we've interviewed. And it wasn't, one guy wanted to answer, I want big, fast, and strong. Well, the reality is you have your choices. So what's your thoughts? Break it down by position.
Well, I think on attack, you need skill and IQ. Right. So I can't just say you can have IQ without skill. Okay.
They're changing the question.
Less athleticism than people might think. I guess you know what I mean?
Right.
In the midfield, I think you need more athleticism, if that makes sense.
Yes.
On the defensive end, you definitely need athleticism.
Yes.
And in the goal, I think you need a competitiveness and a quickness of hands. Okay. The best goalie that I've ever seen play is Sal Lacasio, who's another Long Island guy. And Sal was a big fellow. I mean, he wasn't, he was probably 6 foot, 250 pounds. But I think if you spoke to anyone that played versus Sal, he had the quickest hands you can have.
Right.
So he filled up the goal some, but he had wonderful hands. And so those are just some general things there. But I think, it's very interesting through all the growth of the game. I tell people this all the time. One of the things I've had conversations with Kevin Corrigan about actually is like, with all the growth of the game throughout the Midwest, the South, the West, wherever it may be, okay, it would be very interesting if you looked at the last 10 years and figure out, okay, where are all the top attackmen coming from? Where are all the top midfielders coming from? Where are all the top defensemen coming from? Where are all the top goalies coming from? Okay, you're still finding most of the elite attackmen are coming from Long Island and Baltimore. And you can even peg it down to various schools if you really wanted to.
Sure.
So, if you're not getting the number one attackman from, let's say, Boys Latin School, which Pat Spencer was not, okay? Pat Spencer was the third attackman, okay? Then it might be worth it for you to take the third attackman at Boys Latin School compared to the first attackman in an outlying area, because track record speaks for whatever it may be. So, I mean, those are just statistical things you can look at, right? I mean, but you don't, you know what I mean? But I think you still, you know what I mean? It's still hard to find. And it doesn't mean there are not anomalies. Obviously, there always are. But if you're really going to, are you really going to look at it and kind of go, well, where do I invest my time? Where do I invest my scholarship dollars? Who do I go? Like I said, you still want to get a kid who finishes well. The Canadians kids are better finishers than the United States kids are in general. So if I have to take one or the other, if I really need a lefty goal scorer, I'm probably going to take the kid from Canada. Why? I don't know. Maybe it's because he shoots on a smaller goal his whole life. Maybe because you get beat up more. I don't know. Now, he might not have the same field across IQ, but I need a scorer. I don't need an IQ guy. So
becomes an interesting question. So it's been a fun thread, and everybody's had different ideas. But listen, I appreciate you taking the time today to talk to us.
Thank you for having me. And if I could be of help at all, don't hesitate. Let me know. I wish everybody the best of holidays, and I hope we all get a chance to see a game or two this spring at any level that we're all playing, even if we're just practicing with each other. I still think, when I think back to the Creators game and we think back to the fortunate level that we've had of the Powells and other things that have really kind of introduced us to us, it's playing the game is the true power of lacrosse. It might not be as competitive as we like being Americans, but if we get out there to scrimmage and to play a little bit amongst our friends and peers, it's still going to be very heartwarming, and I think healing for many of us who've missed it. So
you've meant a lot to some of the assistant coaches that have come through your program, and that. But it was fun listening to them talk about you And that's one of the reasons we wanted to have this interview, because it's the backbone of the sport, maybe, that, yeah, it's just all the best in the future. And certainly you and your family have a great holiday.
Thank you, Greg. You too. Have a nice day.
Thanks, Mike.